Good evening. Yes, said the Soviet Union, we shot down that Korean airliner, but we didn't know it was a civilian plane, and it was completely justified. The admission was read as a statement on Moscow television. And it came while the United States was playing audio tapes at the United Nations, tapes of the Soviet pilot's words at the moment of the kill. It's clearly the major story of this day, and thus of ours tonight. Robin?
Our other major topic tonight is the fighting in Lebanon. 2 more U.S. Marines were killed today, caught in the murderous shelling between rival Lebanese militias. Tonight, an intimate documentary look at 2 villages in the center of the Christian Druze warfare, and we examine the growing political problem for President Reagan as Marine casualties rise.
The MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour is funded by AT&T, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and this and other public television stations.
The Soviets did today what many believed they would never do. They admitted shooting down that Korean Airlines 747 over the Sea of Japan last week, which resulted in the death of 269 passengers and crew. It came in a statement read on Soviet television and carried by the Soviet news agency TASS. The statement said a fighter pursuing the airliner, referred to as the intruder, fired warning shots along the plane's flight path. Then, quote, "Since even after this, the intruder plane did not obey the demand to fly to a Soviet airfield and tried to evade pursuit, the interceptor fighter of the anti-aircraft defense fulfilled an order from the command post to stop its flight," unquote. It went on to say such action was in full correlation with Soviet law and that these Soviet pilots stopping the actions of the intruder plane couldn't know it was a civilian plane. Robin?
The United States Embassy in Moscow rejected the Soviet admission as much too little and much too late. The embassy said the Soviets were still trying to evade their full responsibility for the atrocity they've committed. The White House said it was about time the Russians owned up. Presidential spokesman Larry Speakes also implied that the United States has a lot more intelligence information than it's wanted to make public. He said the suggestion that we have irrefutable evidence should not be taken lightly. What evidence the U.S. did wish to make public was presented today when the United Nations Security Council resumed its emergency debate on the airliner. Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick played the Japanese tape recordings of the Soviet pilots who intercepted the 747 and shot it down.
Nothing was cut from this tape. The recording was made on a voice-actuated recorder, and therefore it covers only those periods of time when conversation was heard. Let us now listen to the tape.
Soviet radar began tracking the Korean airliner at 15:51 Greenwich Mean Time. At 16:35 GMT, the Soviets noted the 747 actually was flying over their land mass. At 17:28 GMT, the Korean airliner was flying over the Sea of Okhotsk. At the same time, a U.S. reconnaissance flight, RC-135, was landing at a base on the Aleutian Islands. The RC-135 had been flying a routine mission in support of the SALT compliance agreements off the Kamchatka Peninsula. At 18:26 GMT, a full hour after the U.S. reconnaissance flight had landed, the Korean airliner was destroyed near the Soviet Sakhalin Islands, 1,200 miles away. The tape you are about to hear begins at 17:56 GMT, 1 hour before the Korean airliner was shot down. The communication is from 4 Soviet fighter pilots talking to their ground controllers while tracking the Korean airliner.
Course 100 and a climb to 8,000 meters. I didn't understand. What course? My course is 100. I am executing. Course 50. On course 240. I see it. Roger, understood. I'm flying behind. Course 30, 8,000 meters. Executing course 100. Roger, distance to airfield? Roger. I see it. I'm locked onto the target. Roger. The target isn't responding to IFF. Yes, I'm approaching the target. I'm going in closer. The target's strobe light is blinking. I've already approached the target to a distance of about 2 kilometers. The target is at 10,000 meters. I see both. Distance 10 and 15 kilometers. What are the instructions? Roger. The target is decreasing speed. I'm going round it. I'm already moving in front of the target. I've increased speed. No, it's decreasing speed. It should have been earlier. How can I chase it when I'm already a beam of the target? Now I have to fall back a bit from the target. Repeat. The target's altitude is 10,000 meters. It's located 70 degrees to the left of me. I'm dropping back. Now I'll try a rocket. 12 kilometers to the target. I see both. I'm in a right turn on a course of 300. Executing. Roger, I'm in lock-on. I'm turning to a course of 30. Roger. I'm closing on the target. I'm in lock-on. Distance to target is 8 kilometers. On a course of 30. ZG, missile warheads locked on. I've executed the launch. The target is destroyed. I'm breaking off attack.
The transcript we have just heard, Mr. President, needs little explanation. Quite simply, it establishes that the Soviets decided to shoot down a civilian airliner, shot it down, murdering the 269 persons on board, and lied about it. Contrary to what the Soviets have repeatedly stated, the interceptor pilot saw the airliner's navigation lights and reported that fact to the ground on 3 occasions. Contrary to Soviet statements, the pilot makes no mention of firing any warning shots, only the firing of the missiles, which he said struck the target. Contrary to Soviet statements, there is no indication whatsoever that the interceptor pilot made any attempt either to communicate with the airliner or to signal it for it to land in accordance with accepted international practice.
With a stubbornness which really would be worthy of a better cause, the United States has quite openly now tried to make political capital out of the incident which occurred with the South Korean plane, speculating about the human tragedy which has occurred in an unpardonable way, and thus trying to cast aspersions upon the Soviet Union and its peace-loving foreign policy. They are trying to make use of this incident in order to give fresh impetus to the arms race.
Within minutes of reciting what he thought was the latest Moscow line, the hapless Soviet delegate, Oleg Troyanovsky, heard with everyone else that Moscow now admitted it had shot down the airliner. Afterwards, Ambassador Kirkpatrick was asked why she thought the Soviets had finally admitted it.
Shooting down the Korean Airlines plane. What is your immediate reaction?
My immediate reaction is that they finally acknowledged having shot down KAL-007 just after the United States government, in conjunction with the government of Japan, had introduced definitive proof that that was the case. And not 1 minute before that definitive proof was finally put on the record for the whole world to see.
The decision to give up the stonewalling after 5 days and finally say, yes, we shot down that plane, was probably not easily reached by the Soviet leadership. For some informed speculation on how and why it happened, we go to the most informed speculator available in this country right now. He's Arkady Shevchenko, the highest Soviet official ever to defect to the United States. He was the Undersecretary General of the United Nations at the time and held the highest rank in the Soviet Foreign Service. Before that, he was a personal advisor to Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko. Mr. Shevchenko, you said the other night on this program that you did not believe the Soviet Union would ever admit they shot down this plane. What do you think happened?
I would say that when I made this statement that this Soviet Union really will admit the full truth, but what happened today is not a full admission. I cannot say it's just a little bit of admission that's true, but it was absolutely evident that the plane was shot. And who could do it? Martians? How Soviets can continue and deny that the shooting of the plane? It was absolutely, totally impossible to do. And did the Soviets admit that they did that in violation of all the international rules and so on? No, they continue to maintain their old stories about the warning shots, about the all kind of the thing. They didn't admit that. Did they admit the guilt, responsibility for that? No, they didn't admit that. That's what I meant when I said that the Soviets will not admit the truth.
But even to do this partial admission, I mean, they did just to say, okay, we shot down the plane. How difficult a decision do you think that was for them to make?
It was quite a difficult decision to make, but I must tell you that I can imagine, as being a former Soviet, how they felt and what happened after facing the world outcry, after the visit of Gromyko was to France was postponed, after Canada announced that the landing rights of the Soviet Union would be. They didn't anticipate such a reaction. Plus to that, they didn't know what on the tape. When they saw what is the tape, yesterday already the president quoted part of the tape, they saw that it's no longer impossible to do that. And I think it was quite a reaction for some of the people. I would guess that, let's say, Gromyko reacted. He was mad what was happened.
Mad that the plane was shot down in the first place?
Of course, the first place that the plane was shot at such a moment, and all the elaborate efforts of the Soviet Union to project the image of the peace-loving of the Soviet Union, so much been done to that for so much important goals, and almost everything was destroyed by some action of the military.
Do you believe, now here again, I realize I'm asking you all these kind of impossible questions, but if Gromyko and others believe that a mistake was made, do you think heads are now going to roll, that the position is going to change, that we're going to have to, somebody's going to have to be punished?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that anybody will punish, and you can see that even this partial admission of something, they accompany with accusation of the United States and about the rightness of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet pilots acted properly and so on. And I would say that even political leadership will not dare to punish the military. Military did what they have to do. They would be court-martialed if they wouldn't fulfill the order from the ground control. There is a law, there is regulations. Who approve these regulations? I would say that the pilot is the last, not so much responsible for what happened, to compare with the political leadership. It was Politburo and the political leadership who approved these laws, which not permit, but order the pilots to shoot any intruder in the Soviet space.
So they'd be hard-pressed now to come back and punish anybody who followed the rules.
Of course, evidently it's impossible to do. It would undermine the morale of the army. What would be the repercussion? What they could say?
Thank you. Robin?
Also with us tonight is a Soviet expert from Georgetown University in Washington. She's Madeleine Albright, Professor of International Relations and Director of the Women in Foreign Service program there. Dr. Albright, were you surprised that Moscow has admitted as much as it has?
I certainly was, because we have not learned to follow the Soviet Union when it admits a mistake. I think this is a novel departure, and one, however, that reminds one a little bit of acting with children. Once you've caught them in a lie, then what they do is admit a little bit more, and finally they come out with the real story.
Now, why do you think they are coming out with the story piece by piece? What motivation do you divine is going on in the Kremlin?
Well, I would
the Kremlin?
Agree both with Ambassador Kirkpatrick and Mr. Shevchenko that what we saw on the United Nations tape was irrevocable proof of the fact that the Soviets were in fact in visual contact with that airliner, and it was very hard to mistake it. And also that world public opinion has played a major role in this. I think that the Soviets, again, miscalculated, as they did with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, that there would be public outrage at some kind of an action such as this.
Do you think that the political leadership, including Mr. Gromyko, who's now a member of the Politburo, do you think that they are embarrassed by what the military's done, even though the military was carrying out a new Soviet law?
Well, I think they must be absolutely mortified, and that there's incredible scrambling going on. One of the stories that one hears is that Andropov was away on vacation or somewhere. One can blame it on the doldrums of August, and that perhaps communication was not as rapid as we've been led to believe about the Soviet Union. I think what it also shows is the rigidity of the Soviet system in some ways, where they are obeying instructions from their last such, quote, incident in 1978, and that indeed the ground people as well as the pilots were obeying instructions from a previous similar kind of case.
What do you think is, in terms of the credibility the leadership is looking for right now, where is credibility most important? With the West, and particularly Western Europe, with all the impending flap over the possible installation of U.S. missiles there, or with their own people at home?
Well, I think that they don't have as much trouble maintaining credibility with their own people as some people in the United States might suspect. I think that their major audience in this is Western Europe. Andropov has made many, many efforts to try to win this peace propaganda campaign, and his recent offer on the INF is something
that's the intermediate range nuclear forces.
Right, in terms of a willingness to dismantle and destroy the SS-20s, was part of his peace campaign, which certainly doesn't jibe with all of a sudden seeing the Soviet Union as a monster shooting down civilian planes.
Would you agree with the observation that Mr. Gromyko must be very angry at this?
I certainly would, and I don't envy the people around him who have to deal with this issue. I'm not sure I agree that no heads will roll. We may not hear about which heads do roll. And we can also speculate about the various divisions that are going on in the Soviet hierarchy.
Would your guess be now that if the West continues the pressure, that the Soviet leaders will feel it necessary to make more concessions, such as President Reagan has demanded, or this is where they'll draw the line?
I think that's very hard to speculate on. I think that if we keep, and the West keeps the pressure up, it is possible that they will make further concessions and further admissions, but we are not awfully good at predicting Soviet behavior.
Thank you. Jim?
What's your view of that, Mr. Shevchenko, whether or not there's going to be any, for instance, an apology? The White House immediately said, okay, they've admitted it, now where's the apology? Do you think that's going to happen?
I don't think that they will make an apology. It's
about,
very doubtful.
Yeah. But you don't think so either?
I'd be very surprised if they apologize.
What about the demand from President Reagan and others that the families of the victims be compensated?
Well, it's even least, that is even less possible, I think, than any kind of apology, because it's even legal admission of the guilt and responsibility.
Yeah. So you think they've gone about as far as they're going to go?
I would guess that they went already as far as they can go.
Why?
Because to admit the whole truth will show to the whole world how the Soviets behave in civilized way, and it would again create even worse impression of the Soviet Union if the full truth would be recognized by them.
You agree with that?
Well, I think they're obviously very sensitive to world public opinion. As part of this statement, they were very upset at the fact that President Reagan and others have said that they don't have the international distress channel on their
I noticed today they
and
said,
now
oh,
they
yes,
say,
they
yes,
do.
we do.
Yeah,
So they
yeah.
obviously care a great deal about what
Let's
people
explain
think.
what that is. The point was that it was suggested, in fact, Ambassador Kirkpatrick said that today in one part of her statement, that Soviet fighter planes are not equipped with an international distress channel because they don't want the Soviet pilots to defect. Mm-hmm. And the Soviets in their statement said today, oh, yes, we do. Is that,
right.
Do you have any, can you add anything to that, Mr.
Yeah, I'm not aware whether they're equipped, especially, it's a recent fact, and I was not in the Soviet Union.
Sure. But okay, go ahead.
But I think that is as a sign that they really do care what world public opinion thinks, and to that respect, it's possible that they will make some further concessions. Though I would agree, it's hard to imagine that they will pay some kind of reparations or compensation to the families. They will make up something about Soviet law that makes it impossible for them to do something like that. I'm fascinated by the fact that they are willing to admit that they can't recognize what an airliner looks like that close up. I mean, according to that tape, they really were right on the tail and flying around that plane. So how could they not say that it was a large jumbo jet?
Yeah, that's of course the big, would you not agree, the big flaw in the statement that will still, do you expect, I'm sure they expect or hope that that the story is now over. They've admitted it, and that the thing will now blow over. Any feel about whether or not that in fact is going to be
That is exactly so. I think that they feel it's enough. They already made enough concessions, enough recognized, acknowledged enough, and that would suffice to calm down the public opinion and so on. And I doubt that they will make much, maybe they will say some of the details. I would agree a little bit. But it would be no further admission of the, especially admission of the responsibility and guilt.
Dr. Albright, you mentioned earlier to Robin that you thought there was a possibility that heads would roll, and it might be interesting to speculate on which heads. Feel free to do so.
Well, I don't really want to name names, but I do think that it is possible that there is, in the ongoing succession struggle, despite the fact that it looks as though Andropov is very much in control, that this is a time where there are possible ways to look at differences between the military and the political leadership. The military, it could be said by the political leaders, has made a dreadful mistake by going further or by following standard operating procedures and not really looking at the sensitivities of the situation.
Would that mean Mr. Ustinov would be in trouble, the head of the defense?
No, I would say that if anything happens, it'll be at a lower level and they'll find themselves a scapegoat. But I do think it's worth looking at the situation in the long run to look at what's happening in terms of various interests in the Soviet Union over the long haul in terms of new policy towards the West.
What's your view of that?
I don't think that at the highest level there will be nothing. Nothing will happen with Ustinov. Nothing will happen with the Koldunov, who is a deputy defense minister in charge of the anti-aircraft defense at that level. It could be some reprimands, but I don't think there would be. I disagree that it could be some serious measures taken against these people. And again, I repeat, that would be that these people acted strictly in accordance with the instructions and order approved by the Politburo actually, because any law in the Soviet Union cannot be approved without the Politburo. So how you can tell to these people and punish them? To show the sensitivity in general of the situation in the world in these circumstances, so on. You can imagine when the military pilot is following the plane, he wouldn't think about any kind of a sensitivity. He cannot be asked to be responsible for such actions.
So he was ordered. The tape indicates that he was clearly ordered. And the statement today was clearly ordered by command post down.
By ground control, he was ordered. And on the other hand, I see no point for the Soviets even to punish these people. What for? What the political leadership will gain.
What about for not being able to recognize a commercial airliner?
No, that maybe they could be to an extent blamed for that. But you know the question here is that the most likely political leadership knew that it was a civilian aircraft, like a ground control knew. It's another lie. another cover-up operation. So one thing is inside. It's one thing what the story goes on, and what in a totally different story what is inside there is going on in the Soviet Union. So.
All right. I hear you. Mr. Shevchenko, thank you. Dr. Albright, thank you. Robin?
Speaking of keeping up Western pressure in London, the directors of the International Federation of Airline Pilots called for a 60-day ban on flights to Moscow. The Federation represents pilots in 67 countries. It threatened wider action unless the Soviet Union agreed not to attack civil airliners. The British Airline Pilots Association immediately endorsed the ban. While intensifying the rhetorical pressure on the Soviets, President Reagan said last night he didn't want to break off talks on arms control and human rights. Accordingly, Secretary of State George Shultz got final instructions from the president today for a meeting with Soviet Foreign Minister Gromyko. Shultz then took off for Madrid, where he will meet Gromyko when European nations gather to report on how well the Helsinki agreements on human rights have been observed. President Reagan wants Shultz to confront Gromyko with all the U.S. demands concerning the airliner. Last night, the president also said that the U.S. was more determined than ever to reduce nuclear armaments. So today, Paul Nitze, chief U.S. negotiator, returned to the Geneva talks on intermediate-range missiles. He and his Soviet counterpart, Yulik Vitsinski, greeted each other with the customary smiles and handshakes. Mr. Nitze was also expected to raise the airliner incident. We will be back after a pause to let you collect your thoughts and look at one of our video postcards.
The agony in and about Lebanon worsened again today as 2 more U.S. Marines were killed, and the Reagan administration responded with a stern warning to Syria to knock it off or else. The warning came from White House spokesman Larry Speakes. The Syrians should know that we do have considerable firepower offshore, and they should be circumspect in their own active involvement in instigating any violence in the area, said Speakes. The instigation is the U.S. belief and charge that the Druze militiamen who are raining rockets down on the Beirut airport where U.S. Marines are stationed are under the influence of Syria. The firepower offshore is a heavily armed amphibious task force that includes another 2,000 U.S. Marines. The 2 dead Marines are part of the 1,200-man U.S. Marine contingent in the international peacekeeping force already ashore. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger acknowledged in an interview with CBS this morning the Marines are in a difficult military situation, but he said they will stay until their peacekeeping mission is completed. Robin?
We've been talking for weeks about the mounting violence between the Druze and Christian militias. Tonight we can give you a remarkably intimate look at the people fighting each other in the Shuf mountain area east of Beirut. A documentary report from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation takes us into 2 villages in the center of the fighting. Aleh, a stronghold of the Druze Muslims, and Souk al-Gab, controlled by the Christian Phalange. It was made as the fighting intensified with the Israeli pullout this past weekend. The reporter is Ann Medina.
This is the new front now. It's not Beirut. There are no Palestinian strongholds, no Israeli bombers. But now the focus is turned to the towns and villages on mountains like this, just a few kilometers east of Beirut. Here the battles begin between families, between villages, then militias, and finally they escalate into all-out wars. The issues are land, religion, revenge, and power, the same ones that have scarred so much of Lebanon's history. This is the Shuf. This was not all-out war. It was just a teaser 10 days ago. The kind of fighting that has been happening on and off in the past few months in the Shuf. On this morning, the Druze town of Aleh is being shelled by the Christians. The week before, it was the other way around. As suddenly as they start, the shellings stop, and it's hard to say which blown-off roof is from which attack. Only the fresh blast gives away the date. As the people of LA clean up from the last attack, they are preparing for the next. Across the main road, blockades are being built, giving the town the look of a fortress. At the local welding shop, men who usually make door frames are adapting their skills. They're constructing anti-tank placements. And the town's gas station has been transformed into a center for sandbagging. Everyone and everywhere here has changed. A war is coming that will involve every man, woman, and child, and they know it. Unlike many other towns in the Shuf, 80% of the Druze are staying in LA to tough it out. Many have nowhere else to go, but it's more than that. This is their home, and it's worth the price. Everyone tells me the same thing. They won't leave the mountain. They will face the Christians. You have fought in LA before yourself? He says he fought before and will fight again.
Here is not Sabra and Shatila. Here is the mountains. We are, as a Druze, we lived here since 100 years. We built this country. They couldn't treat us as they treat the Palestinians in Beirut. So we have to fight.
Katyusha rockets from Korea, shipped in crates marked tractor parts. A year ago, when the Israelis came, the town had two 82mm guns. Today, it is organized and armed. And the guns have been tested on real targets. They have 105 howitzers. They have mortars, including the 120s, and they're ready to move with their anti-helicopter guns parked in a local garage nearby.
Big explosive.
The ones they're proudest of, however, are the Soviet-made Grads, electrically fired rockets that can go a long distance, up to 11 kilometers. Only 3 men in a van are needed to set them up. And you can send that to the airport from this area?
From LA, yes.
All this hardware is only part of what they have. The big guns that they did not show us are kept in Syrian-controlled areas, higher up in the mountains. But LA's guns are effective, given their position in the Shuf Mountains overlooking Beirut. It's easy to close down an airport or shell the Lebanese army. Fighting in the Shuf travels to Beirut very quickly. Last week, the guns in LA, for example, supported the Shiite Muslims when the Shiites battled the Lebanese army near the airport. The airport is still closed because of the shelling. The guns that control the Shuf Mountains have a great strategic advantage. That's why the Israelis stayed weeks beyond their original deadline, to allow the Lebanese army to take on one front at a time, first Beirut, then later the Shuf. The Israelis have been the reluctant sheriffs, keeping the peace, though it was their very presence that had stirred up the status quo. Soon, the Lebanese army will have to man these checkpoints and positions. They will have to keep track of the guns and weapons and control the movements of the Christians and Druze on the roads. Till now, it has been the Israelis that have kept a lid on things. It has been their tanks outside of LA that has kept the fighting down. It has been their patrols through towns that have reminded both sides that bigger guns can shell them if they don't stop fighting. LA is a large, modern town, but its citizens have been trapped. Now there's only one way in or out, by foot, up and down steep hills. All 4 roads to LA have been cut, so food, medicine, money, anything coming into LA has only this one way in. This is one of the roads into LA that the Christian phalange have cut off. If a Druze passes, he could be killed. Any Druze, 6 years old or 60. But this is now the only way into a Christian town, Souk El Arb, because the Druze took over some of their roads. It's a game of you cut my road, I'll cut yours, with the result that villages throughout the Shuf have become isolated. If a stranger does enter, his name is noted down. Before the Israelis came to the Shuf, Christians and Druze passed through here. Not anymore. Before the Israelis came, Christians and Druze used to live in Souk El Garb. Now, only a few Christians have stayed. Those that are here are for the most part the older people, who slowly wait for the next shelling or the next sniper shot. Souk El Garb is right next to LA and therefore often a target. It's a state of no war and no peace, an in-between limbo that makes people impatient.
Maybe like one big bang and it'll all be over. But we've been saying that all along. Every time we hope there'll be a big bang and it'll be over. And we have a big bang, but it's not over. We end up in a situation more miserable than the one we just left. So in reality, but what keeps us going, I guess, is the most primitive instinct. It's called survival. You gotta survive one way or the other.
The Saka family have been survivors for more than 20 years here. The mother, Elizabeth, is just returning from a stay with friends. She always comes back, although all of them could easily leave. Despite the danger, despite the signs that the enemy gunmen are close, the family of 9 children stick together. They've grown up here, lived with Palestinians, lived with Druze, and now they're trying to live with the thought of another war. The 2 oldest speak English. One son, Eli, who now has to give up university to fight with the Phalange, and Claude, who teaches in the local school when it's open. Once again, the feeling is no peace until after another war.
Every day we have shooting, we have snipers, we have bombs. Every day. We don't sleep at night.
No peace before the battle. Peace after the battle.
Do you agree?
They don't want peace.
The battle to bring peace to Souk El Garb will be coordinated from this armed private mansion near the highest point in the town. The man in charge is known simply as Oscar, a man who loves dogs and guns and does not love Arabs. Oscar's army, he says, includes some 300 men, many of whom were professional fighters brought in from Beirut. Reinforcements, we are told, could quickly bring the total up to more than 4,000. The Phalange, the Christian forces, are ready. Their confidence is based upon the months, sometimes years of training they've received for just such a time. The Phalange is not simply a local militia. It is a large, well-financed private army that has taught men from the villages to fight the kinds of battles they'll face in the Shuf. Most young Christian men go through it, and up until now, it's been the only army in the whole of Lebanon that has any real clout. It's the army that Oscar and Souk El Garb are depending on.
It's a civil war.
And it's going on now, and it hasn't stopped?
It has to stop. We are working to stop it. We are fighting to stop it. That's what we are doing here. Why I am here? I'm here to stop the civil war. I'm here to protect the people who are here, not to get killed, and then to go to revenge.
Oscar's revenge, the Druze revenge. There has been a kind of civil war already going on throughout the Shuf. This is just one small sample of what can happen in Lebanon. The battle here in the Christian sector of LA lasted a mere 2.5 hours. The Christian Phalange had come in with the Israelis. They'd set up their headquarters, and then the Druze wiped them out, along with the homes of many of the families living here. 2.5 hours, that's all it took to completely devastate this place. These are the men who were supposed to stop that kind of bloodbath. They are part of still another army, the Lebanese army. Some are Christian, some Druze, but now they are the army for all of Lebanon. They should have been the peacekeepers, not the Israelis. They should have stopped the warring factions, but both sides reject it. The final countdown for the Lebanese army, the Phalange, and the Druze forces began late Saturday night when the Israeli pullout began. The APCs, the Israeli soldiers, the tanks, they've all left the positions in the Shuf that they had fought for and held for more than 15 months. It's not our problem, was the feeling. Row after row of armor poured into the waiting ships. Finally, the sheriff was leaving the town in the hands of the inhabitants, leaving it to the militias, the Katyushas, and the Grad rockets to sort out. The reaction to the withdrawal was instant. In a matter of minutes, the guns of Alais and the Phalange army of Oscar went at each other. As of this morning, the Lebanese army still hadn't entered the Shuf, and there was little control over the fighting. The latest chapter in Lebanon's bloody history had begun. For the Journal, this is Ann Medina, witnessing a tragic prediction come true.
That report was filed yesterday for the CBC Journal in Toronto. The correspondent was Ann Medina. Late today, the Lebanese army said it had advanced as far as the village of Souk el-Garb. It is indiscriminate shelling from that factional fighting which has been hitting the U.S. Marines stationed only 5 miles away at Beirut Airport. As the Marines' exposure and casualties increase, so do the political problems for President Reagan. Judy Woodruff has more on the political fallout in Washington from both Lebanon and the Korean airliner. Judy?
Joining us tonight are two members of key congressional committees, Senator Paul Tsongas, Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee, who is in the public television studios of station WGBH in Boston, in his home state of Massachusetts, and Senator Dan Quayle, Republican of Indiana, a member of the Armed Services Committee, here with me in Washington. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Senator Quayle, there are now 5 Marines who have been killed. We've had more than 30 wounded. Should American troops remain in Lebanon?
Well, I believe the president essentially has 3 options right now. He can, 1, increase the troop commitment to Lebanon, which he's not going to do. He can withdraw immediately, which he is not going to do. Or he can pursue the status quo, and that is what he is going to do, the status quo, the objective to try to have an independent Lebanon, eradicate all the foreign forces, the Israelis, the PLO, and the Syrians, is the policy. We went in there as a peacekeeping force. That is still our mission, to be a peacekeeping force, and we do want to see an independent Lebanon. And the status quo policy is what the administration is going to pursue now. And I think for the time being, that's about the only thing they can do.
So you're saying despite the fact that the casualties are rising, we should stay there?
Well, I believe for now, I think it would be wrong just to cut bait right now. I mean, we asked the Italians to go in, we asked the British to go in, we asked the French to go in. The Jamel government is still in power. We want to see the Jamel government to succeed. And for us to get out right now, yes, that would be wrong.
For how long? How long do we stay? Forever? Indefinitely?
Well, this is the big question. Now, if in fact you see the fighting continue with the Druze and the Phalange up in the Shuf, and the Lebanese armed forces are unable to get control of the Shuf and get control of the country, and it deteriorates into a civil war and it becomes more of a mission and responsibility of combat rather than peacekeeping, then our policies are going to have to change. Our policies were, 1, to keep the peace, a peacekeeping force. But with 5 Marines dead, hostilities increasing, I think that our policies could very well change in the near future, depending on the circumstances of Lebanon.
Senator Tsongas, what do you think? How many more casualties can the United States endure?
Well, I think the point that Dan made was quite correct, that the United States is faced with, in essence, keeping up the present policy, or in essence, leaving. And if you leave, there's no question in my mind that the French will come out, the Italians will come out, and you really have a vacuum. And I think into that vacuum we'll get sucked, particularly the Syrians. If the Syrians come in, the Israelis come in. Because of the Syrian SAM sites, the Israelis would have no choice but to take out those sites. And as you know, those are manned by Soviets.
But haven't the Marines, Senator, really become the target? The Lebanese, or excuse me, the Muslims have said that they consider the peacekeeping force part of the Lebanese alliance. You know, is there any out for the United States?
Well, the only out, I'm not sure there is one in the definite sense of that term, is to have a strong central Lebanese government. I mean, that is the only peg upon which we can have any hope. That's going to be a long haul. But the fact is you're faced with an option at this point of withdrawal. And yet the long-term impact of that is so devastating that as unhappy as the present situation is, you really do not have a viable policy option. What happens down the road if we find out the Lebanese central government has no chance of survival and viability? Well, you may well be in a position where that option is closed as well, and you simply pull out, but not at this point.
Senator Quayle, what about President Reagan? Up until now, he has refused to invoke the War Powers Act. Do you think he should?
I believe that as the hostilities and the fighting increase in Lebanon, that the administration will invoke the War Powers Act and ask Congress to concur with the policies that they pursue. They have thus far not invoked the War Powers Act. I really believe that it's a legal dispute. International lawyers can debate on whether it's imminent hostilities aimed at the Marines right now. They were not. There's two ways you can invoke the War Powers Act. If they were put in there in a hostile situation, then it would be invoked. They obviously were not put in a hostile situation, but it has become hostile. I think it's an open question, and I anticipate in due time, unless things are sorted out very quickly and peace is established and a strong Lebanon government emerges very quickly, I think in a short period of time that the administration will have no choice and will request Congress to concur with their policies.
But as you know, right now they're arguing that the Marines are not really in a combat situation, that these killings have just been isolated incidents.
They have argued that it's not a combat situation because their mission is not of combat nature. But I would surmise that if, in fact, casualties continue, and in all probability they will, and if, in fact, the hostilities increase, from your report that looks like hostilities are going to increase, I really don't see too much maneuvering room that the administration is going to have on this issue, and therefore I think it would be prudent for them to come to the Congress and ask for their concurrence and support in the policy that they want to pursue, if in fact they want to stay. But it may deteriorate so quickly and so fast that the only viable option is to begin some sort of a withdrawal.
Senator Tsongas, what happens if the War Powers Act is invoked? What happens next?
Well, first of all, it should be invoked. I think the administration is making a very serious mistake, somehow suggesting that hostilities are not prevailing in Lebanon. Our people are being killed, and if the War Powers Act does not apply in this situation, then I think the original intent of the legislation has long since been lost. It's the wrong fight for the administration. I think if they came to the Congress and we had to vote on whether we support or do not support the present policy, that the majority of the members of the House and Senate would have no choice, in essence, but to go along with keeping the Marines in there. But to argue that there is no War Powers applicability in this case is, I think, really a very serious error in judgment.
Senator, let me switch signals on you, if you don't mind, and ask you about the Soviets shooting down the Korean plane. Do you think the President's response has been firm enough?
In the sense of, in essence, betraying our sense of indignation, I thought he did a very good job. In the sense of rallying support around the world to respond to the Soviet act, I think not at all. The obvious example that we had was to deny Aeroflot landing rights. That had to happen. The President clearly has been unable to rally the world community, and we can argue why, but the fact is that that was not done. And so the kinds of things that he mentioned were really fluff. The transportation ban, the technology transfer, those kinds of things are not relevant. This was an international incident. It's not the U.S. and the Soviets having at each other.
Well, excuse me, what should he have done? I mean, should we slow down the arms control negotiations? Should we have imposed a grain embargo again? What should he have done more?
Of all the alternatives that were talked about, virtually all of them are counterproductive. The grain deal, were that to be revoked, would hurt the United States far more than the Soviets. They would simply go to Argentina again and get their grain. In terms of the arms control negotiations, you don't engage in arms control to be good to the Soviets. You do it because it's in your national interest. There was and there remains only one viable alternative to, in essence, punish the Soviets for what they did and change their policy, and that is a ban on landing rights. Now, the administration clearly is not moving in that direction effectively, and I find some hope that the pilots themselves, the International Pilots Association, having now come out for a ban on Aeroflot landing rights, that they may well prod the governments of Western Europe as well as the United States to begin to have some kind of considered action. I think the issue is not President Reagan again going after the Soviets, because I think that clouds it. The issue is whether you're going to have internationally an acceptable level of behavior. And the Soviets have violated that, and you're not going to get at them by some of the measures that the President referred to last night. The Soviets know very well those measures have no clout.
But for Senator Quayle, do you agree with Senator Tsongas that the President didn't go far enough? And if he didn't, then what could he realistically have done?
No, I think the President did exactly what a President would do in this situation. Ronald Reagan's finding out that being President and making these decisions is very tough. But he made a very terse statement to the Soviet Union. He called the action barbaric. He said that the Soviet Union had been lying. Both are true. He also indicated that he's going to increase defense spending and wants to see his defense proposals through the Congress. The Soviet Union understands strength. They understand what defense expenditures mean. That's tough. That's not something that is fluff. I believe that the President is right on line, and I think the worst thing for the President, what he could have done, is to make this a Soviet-American issue. As Paul has pointed out, it is a world issue, and we have got to do this in concert with our allies. We may feel good the next day by taking a unilateral action and sort of going after them, but it will not work. We've got to develop something that, in fact, will work.
But more than 50 Americans were killed. Where's the retaliation?
The retaliation will come with the world opinion in isolating the Soviet Union. It is beginning today. The Soviet Union admitted, finally, it only took them about 6 days to admit that they shot down that plane. What's the next step? Every time that we meet with every time our allies meet with the Soviet Union, the #1 thing on the agenda should be a formal explanation, demand reparations, demand compensation, demand apologies, and show the Soviet Union for what they truly are. And this is what's going to happen. I believe it is a real black eye for the Soviet Union. I think it's going to put them in a corner that hopefully will expose them for what they truly are, and that is a country unconcerned about human rights and international law.
Senator Tsongas, one last question. You've been one of the leaders, one of the leading supporters of the nuclear freeze movement. Do you think this incident has served to weaken that movement?
It depends on the reaction. I think there are some people who would say this shows that the Soviets are indeed the focus of evil, and therefore we have to have more armaments. The counter-reaction, among a lot of people, at least in this part of the country, is that here we've had 3 years of the arms buildup. We've had the President's very hard language, and here for the first time is a real crisis. What has all that military spending gotten us? Would the President have been any better off if he had the MX missile in place? The answer, obviously, is no. And so I think people have come to understand how serious the situation is between the two countries and the need for some operating relationship between the two. We still don't know now how this thing is going to play itself out. We'll just have to wait and see.
But I gather you both agree that this helps the President in attempting to sell the MX in the Congress.
I think there's no doubt in the short term this helps the President. 12 months from now, 6 months from now, we'll have to wait and see. Short term, definitely yes.
Okay, thank you both, Senator Tsongas, Senator Quayle, for joining us. Robin?
In other domestic news today, leaders of the United Auto Workers Union voted to accept a wage offer totaling $2.42 an hour. Now, the 56,000 union employees of Chrysler will be asked to ratify the 25-month contract approved today by the 170-member Chrysler Council of the UAW. Optimism about interest rates sent the stock market up sharply. On the New York Stock Exchange, the Dow Jones average of 30 industrial stocks went up more than 23 points to 1238.72. Wall Street watchers said the optimism was based on an unexpectedly large drop in the nation's money supply last week. Now, in case you joined us late, here again are the main points of today's news. Moscow admitted it shot down the Korean 747, but said its fighter pilots could not have known it was a civilian plane. The admission came shortly after the United States played tape recordings of Soviet pilots making the attack to the United Nations Security Council. Late today, Undersecretary of State Lawrence Eagleberger said the Soviet admission that it shot down the 747 was not enough. He restated the American demands at a news conference.
Today's release continues to lie to the world, but also raises the most serious questions about the competence of the Soviet air defense system, with all the danger that implies. The world community still needs straight answers. We are tired of lies and half-truths. Decent respect for the opinion of mankind requires that the Soviet Union must provide a full accounting of what transpired. It must make an unequivocal apology for its actions. It must make restitution for the victims' families. It must cooperate with international efforts to investigate this tragedy and to recover its victims. the Soviet Union must accept the norms of civilized society in respecting the lives of innocent travelers. The world demands that the Soviet Union give assurances and take specific steps to ensure that the events of August 31 cannot occur again.
It's been a heavy and grim news day, and thus a heavy and grim news hour. Thus one last story. It flows from the fact that Washington, among other things, is the press conference capital of the world. Every day there are scores called and held, every week hundreds, from those of the president and senators and cabinet officials to those of interest in lobbying groups, some a bit obscure. Probably the most fascinating recent one was that called by the American Chemical Society last week at the Washington Hilton Hotel to announce a major breakthrough about the mating habits of moths. Here's just a flavor of how it went.
The female moth has its own specific perfume that it puts out into the air and attracts the males from a long distance. Now, we found out with this particular insect that when the male gets there, close to the female, that the courtship behavior still is not over with. The female is very coy. She doesn't accept all males. So what the male has to do is prove himself. And so what he does, he flashes these hair pencils in her face, or her head, as such it is with a moth. He flashes these hair pencils near her head, and she gets a whiff of the male's perfumes. And if he has the right smell, and he flashes his hair pencils in the right technique, then she will ram her head into his rear end, and they'll whirl around for mating. But there is another possibility. I've said that you have to hair pencil before mating occurs. There's one type of male, and we call it the sneaker. And if there's a male who's flashing his hair pencils to a female, another male sometimes can come up and mate immediately with that female without hair penciling. That's the only time you'll ever see mating without hair penciling, is when another male is already hair penciling her. This one sneaks up around behind and mates with her instead. And that's successful about 4% of the time when you have two males arriving at the same time.
Remember, you heard it here first. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Jim. That's our news hour for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
The MacNeil-Lehrer News Hour is funded by the new AT&T, more than a new look, a new outlook, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by this and other public television stations.
For a transcript, send $2 to Box 345, New York, New York, 10101.